Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about how your childhood impacts how you handle your child's anxiety or OCD. None of us are immune to this. Every single one of us has had a childhood, and every single one of us has grown up with elements of that childhood impacting how we navigate and interact with our current life, including how we interact and handle our kids' anxiety and OCD, how you even interact with your parenting. And I'm really passionate about this topic because it's one area that we can work on. It's one area that we can explore and process because, as I've been talking about a lot lately on this podcast, we are only one puzzle piece to our kids' anxiety and OCD. They have to do so much, but we are on our own journey. And I've mentioned this quite a lot lately because I'm really passionate about this topic, that how we show up to our kids' anxiety and OCD is our journey. Regardless of how my child wants to work on anxiety or OCD, and by child, I mean child, teen, or young adult, we don't get to control that. But that doesn't mean that we're off the journey. I am raising a child who has these struggles, whether they're working on it or not. And that impacts me. It impacts my well-being. It impacts how I interact with my child. It impacts my family. And that's part of our life and our journey. And so I want to talk today about your childhood and how that plays a role. In the first half, I'm going to talk about the many ways that it does. Some of it may not be surprising, and some of it might be. You might kind of get a couple of ahas as I'm talking, because sometimes we don't really dive deep and we don't realize all the different elements that can impact how we're showing up for life currently. And after the break, we're going to talk about what do you do about it, because I never like to just talk about a problem or something that is impacting other things without giving you some easy, concrete steps for resolution and working through it. So that's what's on the plate for today. But before I get started, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside the US. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. I also want to mention that I am doing a free series. It's a brand new series. And so no matter how long you've been listening to me, you have not taken this series. I wanted to introduce a new series based on my ongoing, growing passion about supporting you on this journey as well as your child, working on your mindset, working on these things that are smudges on our lenses. And in my new free series, How to Be an Effective Anchor for Your Child with Anxiety or OCD, I walk you through in depth 4 critical areas that are the most likely to impact how you show up for your child's anxiety or OCD. And that is your own childhood and or traumas, which we're actually going to dive into today in this episode. We're talking about your triggers. These are general triggers like being late or being disrespected or messiness or, things like that. We're going to be talking about your mental health. A lot of us, the apple doesn't fall far from the genetic tree. And so many of us have our own either histories with mental health issues or current mental health issues, or our kids' issues bring up our past mental health issues. So we're going to be talking about that. And the fourth one is something that we all have, which is a mindset and what we tell ourselves. What's the narrative? What's the story? A lot of times we are on automatic pilot and we don't tune into those unhelpful, distorted, depressing stories that we are telling ourselves as we're helping our kids with anxiety and OCD. And you can bet that that's going to impact how you show up. So I'm going to walk you through your mindset. And then in the series, we're going to talk about how to shift all of that. So if that sounds helpful, join us. You're not too late. It's a 3-part video series. The videos are on demand. The series is going all the way until February 7th. And so this episode is being released February 4th. The second video was released today. The third video will be released on Thursday, February 6th, 2025. But they're on demand, which means that and they're only around 30 minutes each. So you can go and watch the first video, catch up the second video, and then the third one will come out on Thursday. The replay will be up all weekend. So if you have other loved ones that you want to watch it with, or you want them to watch, they can watch it. The other very cool thing is that I'm doing 3 bonus live classes. I already had 1 bonus live class, but there is another one tomorrow, and there is another one on Friday. And so there will be replays of those bonus live classes as well. This is all happening on the series website. And to register and get access to that website, just go to atparentingsurvivalseries.com. It is free. It is brand new. None of you have taken it. Even if you've taken 10 of my series before, you haven't taken this one. So join us over there, and I hope that you find it helpful. All right, let's dive into today's topic, which is very much what we're talking about over in the Anchor series as well. So let's talk about your childhood. In the Anchor series, I talk about how we see our child's anxiety and OCD through the smudges on our lenses, that none of us see anything perfectly clearly in life, honestly, to be realistic. We see it through our own experiences, our own traumas, our own childhood, our own fears, our own triggers, our own belief systems. Smudge, 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 all over your lenses. So what you're seeing is a distorted view. And that's just reality. I mean, nobody's walking through life without smudges on their lenses. We all see things through our own issues. But it does impact our kids with anxiety and OCD. And when we are seeing things through the lens of some of our childhood smudges, that's what we're diving into today. In the Anchor series, we go through all smudges, all 4 areas that I've identified as the most common smudgies. I don't know why I just said smudgies. That's weird. Thought I was being cute, but then it sounded really awkward and cringy. But we go through all 4 of them. This episode is really to flesh out that one. We do flesh out this one as well in the series. But our childhood is one of those smudges. And I'm going to go through what I thought were 5 different areas around childhood that can impact and create that smudge. So let's dive into it. And remember, after the break, we're going to go through what to do about this. So don't get too this is heavy. I don't want to dig all this up. You don't have to dig it all up. It doesn't have to go too deep, especially if you had a lot of trauma and a lot of overwhelm. Some of you haven't. Some of you might be like, Natasha, I had an idyllic childhood. We're talking like Leave It to Beaver, which is totally dating me. Leave It to Beaver, by the way, was way old when I was young too. We're talking Brady Bunch. How about that? That sounds better. Leave It to Beaver was in the 50s. I was not alive for that. But we're going to talk about you too, those of you with like the quote unquote idyllic childhood, because there's something to talk about with all of you, regardless of good, bad, neutral, not labeling childhood. So let's dive into the first one. The first one is how our parents approached issues. How did they raise you? Were they overly strict or were they overly permissive? Did you have one parent who was strict and one parent who was permissive? Did you have one parent who felt uncomfortable with the other parent's parenting style and would try to undermine them in a passive sort of way? Those impact how you show up, how you interact with your partner when you're dealing with your child. And some of this stuff is just parenting in general, but you add that extra layer of anxiety and OCD, and it's even more intense because I feel like anxiety and OCD just turns up the volume on parental stress. And so how I'm going to give you some examples on how each one of these things I'm going to talk about shows up. If you had a really strict parent, you might have a hard time pulling back your involvement with anxiety and OCD because you feel like it's cruel and you feel like it's being quote unquote strict. And so you're missing the nuance in what we teach you as far as systematically pulling back your involvement in enabling the anxiety and OCD as being strict because of your own childhood experiences. It doesn't feel good to see your child not get what they want. On the other hand, maybe you were raised by a strict parent and you want to be strict. And so you don't want to, it's hard for you to get to the level where you can empathize and look past maybe disrespect or difficult behavior and see beyond that into the disorder of what's driving those behaviors, because your dad would never have tolerated that and you would never say that to your dad. And how dare your child say that to you? Because that's how you were programmed. It's how you were raised. And so it's hard to see beyond that. If you had a permissive parent, that was, very allowing and maybe over coddling, maybe that's your norm and you feel like you need to do that too. And so it's hard for you to pull back and maybe not always coddle or accommodate when your child wants you to do an OCD compulsion or wants to avoid their anxiety to the point where it's not going to help them function in society, but it feels uncomfortable because that's not what was modeled for you. Or maybe you don't want to be like the permissive parent. I can go on all day. There can be a gazillion different renditions of what I'm talking about. But ask yourself, how does my parents' parental approach impact me? For me, and I'm going to use myself as an example in all of these. For me, my parents were emotionally neglectful. They were missing in action. They both had their own mental health issues. I had a sister who had mental health issues. We're going to get into that later. And so for me, I want my kids to know that they're seen, they're heard, they're taken care of. And so that drives how I parent, where I'm always making sure that their needs are met and that they feel validated on some level. That mingles with how I'm dealing with them. Okay, that was the first one, our parents' approach to our issues. Second category, and we've got 5 of these, okay? Second one, how our parents felt about fears. Now, if you had anxiety and OCD, we're going to be talking about that. That shows up too. Like, how did they handle your anxiety or OCD struggles? But if you didn't have anxiety or OCD and your siblings didn't have anxiety or OCD, or it wasn't in your family, how did they handle fears in general? Because that's still important. Did they normalize fears? Did they validate it? Like, I know this is scary and I know that you can do it, right? That's kind of what we're teaching you how to do. Validate it and also instill some belief that you feel like they can do it. I grew up in the 70s. There wasn't a lot of that going on. Sometimes I wonder, is it just my house or was it, that time period? And I think that it's a little bit of both, but I know I've talked to a lot of other friends who are around my age and they had different parenting experiences. And so I don't think it's a blank slate of insensitivity that I experienced. There were good parents in the 70s who were ahead of their times. But did they normalize it? Did they shame you, right? Don't cry. Don't be a wuss. Just do it. And then did they force you? So in my house, I had definitely an anxiety disorder that was not being labeled or treated. I was not the front burner issue. My dad had bipolar with psychosis. My older sister was going off a cliff. My little sister actually had some issues and she got into therapy at one point. I was the middle child. I learned how to have a brave face and mask and was the one that tried to keep everybody together. Very classic middle child. And when I would be anxious, my mom would get angry with me. Sometimes she would hit me. So I don't think it was just, back in the 70s, they hit you a lot more. So it's hard for me to say, is that abuse or was that kind of normal? But, she'd hit me in the face. So I feel like that was pretty not okay. I wasn't beat up to the point where I was bloody or bruised, but I was hit in the face. And my mom would say, come here. And I'd say, no, I can't come here. You're going to hit me. She would say things like, go upstairs. And then I was afraid to go upstairs because it was dark and I thought there were bad guys upstairs. And she'd be like, go upstairs. And I'd be like, I can't go upstairs. And she'd be like, come here. And I'd be like, I'm not going to. You're going to hit me. And then I couldn't go upstairs too because she was standing in front of the stairs. And I knew that she was going to hit me as I go up the stairs. So I was scared of my mom. And then sometimes she was my best friend. I think now that I look back on it, there was some borderline personality disorder issues going on with her. She wasn't the identified person with mental health issues. It was my dad. But But she forced me. She forced me to do a lot of things. She forced me to go upstairs and get my shoes when it was dark. And we might say, well, that's good, right? Isn't that what we want? We want our kids to be encouraged to go do the things that are hard for them. There's a difference between validating the fear, creating small steps that lead to big steps, and paralyzing your child with fear and authority to the point where they're afraid that if they don't do it, they're going to get hit or they're going to get in trouble. That is so vastly different. But if you had a childhood where your parents were like mine, where they forced me to do really scary things, they would force me to talk to people. They would force me to, I had social anxiety. They'd force me to do things in social settings. I remember they dropped me off at gymnastics and I was like throwing up in the car. They'd force me to get out. I threw up all the time going to school. They'd force me to get out. But there was no validating. There was no walking me through it. I was in my station wagon in the 70s. It was just get out and wipe your mouth on the way out. I talk about this in my memoir, Out of My Shell. If you haven't read it, you can read it. It's on Amazon. But I do talk about how these childhood struggles impacted my ability to function and how eventually it turned into social anxiety. And I do feel like there is a correlation between, not for everybody, but that having these childhood experiences and then moving forward, I had bullying, that these were like, this was the water that sprouted the genetic seed of anxiety that turned into social anxiety for me. So you might not want to force your kids, quote unquote force, to do exposures or to do hard things or to walk towards their fears because you felt forced, but they're different. And so understanding that is important. Okay, third area, mental health issues in your home. Some of you may not have had any mental health issues. I'm talking a lot about my family and it can seem, wow, that's dysfunctional. No wonder why she's talking about smudges on her lenses. But your smudges don't have to be as big as mine. Some of you might have much bigger smudges, to be honest. But we all have smudges of how our parents showed up for us, how they handled our fears. But some of you had mental health issues in your home. It might have been relatives. It might be extended relatives. It might be one of your parents. It might be one of your siblings. And so how did that paint the picture of mental health for you? For me, it showed me a very hopeless situation. My father had multiple suicide attempts. We had police involvement, people disappearing. Every developmental milestone I can remember was attached to where I went and visited my dad in a psych hospital. So I remember when I first was learning to drive, I drove through the cornfields of Pennsylvania because we were on our way to go visit my dad at another treatment center. And so I have memories and they're always attached. When I was going off to college, I remember that I was going to Columbia in New York to visit my dad because he was at Columbia University getting ECT treatment. And so it's like all my memories are tied to these situations of hopelessness because he never got better. And so how do you see mental health issues from a perspective of who else do you know in your family who has had mental health issues? It's highly genetic. It's not, genetics isn't the only thing, right? Because otherwise we'd have identical twins always having the exact same prognosis and onset of OCD. We don't have that. And anxiety. There is a mix of genetics and environmental influences, but most of us are going to have relatives with mental health issues because there is that genetic component. I can't tell you how many relatives I have. In fact, I would have to venture to say almost all of them have something going on. But how do you view that? How was mental health talked about? Was it a shameful thing? Like, Uncle Johnny, really struggled our whole life, or Uncle Bill is, a shut-in in his house, and we don't want to be like Uncle Bill. If it's talked about really negatively, that can impact how you're viewing your child's mental health. So something to think about. The next one I want to talk about is the norms of your childhood. All right, we're getting to you idyllic people out there. You lucky people who had the Brady Bunch of idyllic childhoods. Sometimes when we had a pretty good childhood and we're like, nope, I don't have any of the stuff she's talking about, thank goodness. Well, you've got a smudge too. And that smudge is, I want this for my child. This is what should be happening. This is what childhood looks like. Why is my child not out riding a bike and playing with the neighbors? And I remember being a football star, or I remember going to the prom, and my child's not going to have any of those things. I remember just relaxing with my brother and sister, and we got along so well. So when you've had somewhat of an idyllic childhood, that can add to your grief of what your child is losing through your smudgy lens, and the idea of what you thought parenting would be. When I grow up, I'm going to take my son out and we're going to play ball. Well, now he won't touch a ball because it's contaminated. Or when I grow up, we're going to do tennis together because I love tennis and they're going to be a tennis star too. Well, they won't touch a tennis racket. We have our own grief of what some of us envisioned our parentinghood to look like and what our kids' childhood would look like. And that can be hard. Okay, and I'm kind of going through these rather fast because there are a lot of them. And we are diving into this in a deep way in the series as well. So definitely register for the Anchor series at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. And we'll go through this. And in my live class, you'll hear other people talking and asking questions around this. And you can too. So just join us. The last category I just want to touch on before we move on is traumas. So a lot of us have had trauma, and that can create fears or residue that impact how we interact with the world and with our kids. I'll give you some examples. My father had a lot of suicide attempts, and seeing somebody unresponsive and growing up in a home where it was, where's your dad? What's your dad doing? Did anyone call your dad? Like, this need to always keep tabs and keep him alive was a pressure that we all felt. And that impacts how I interact with my kids when I'm worried about, are they going to get so depressed they're going to get suicidal? I need to keep tabs on them. It's my family's culture, if you will, to keep people alive. Like, we own it. I was trained and taught by my mom and my older sister even, that it's our burden and responsibility to keep family members alive. And almost to the point where we take on their burden. They just lay there and don't, involve themselves in treatment and don't do anything to help themselves. And we have to have the burden of keeping them alive. That was the message that I got from how I watched my mom handle my dad. And when my mom passed away, it's still the message I got as an adult when I watched my sister handle my dad. And we all try to handle my dad, but she was the closest. It was still that same message of, did you call him? We need to call him on a rotation. We need to, and that burden placed on family members, that carries into my kids. One, it makes me burn out before I even begin because I'm like, oh my gosh, and now it's like part 2. This is too much. It makes me overreactive where I look into comments or behaviors through the smudgy lens of my family and not what's clearly going on. It makes me go into the what ifs versus what is. So where are your smudges? Do you have any trauma? And they don't have to be big traumas. Also, my dad was unpredictable and violent. And so when he was depressed and we were making any noises, if I was near him or he thought my sister and I were laughing and he thought we were fighting, I would get thrown up against the wall or I'd get thrown across the room. And so this fear of someone who's struggling with mood stability can turn on me and get very violent very fast. Now, it didn't help that I started working after graduate school. One of my first jobs was working in a level 1 lockdown treatment center with really violent teenagers. And that perpetuated that story because they were also very unstable and very violent. And so when I see one of my kids revving up, throwing pillows, which is certainly not at the level that I'm talking about, I go from 0 to 60 because my fight, flight, and freeze response gets triggered and I'm in trauma mode because I think things are going to get messy. And they never do, but there's a fear. Okay, a lot on Natasha. I apologize. It was like a therapy session. I just wanted to give you concrete examples. That was my hope, is like, this is what it looks like for me. Now take that and what does it look like for you? It will be totally different for you. And if you want to pause this podcast and just jot down some things, do that. We're going to be doing that. We have worksheets and stuff over in the Anchor series. So if you want to save your time, just join there and we'll walk you through it in more detail. But these are the things we're talking about. Okay, after the break, we'll talk about what do we do with all this information. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Welcome back. So that was a lot, right? Shake that out. Shake your hands. Get it out of your body. The first thing is it is important to feel the feels. And what I mean by that is when you bury things, it festers. And then it becomes subconscious. It doesn't become intentional. It is dictating how you're interacting with your child with anxiety or OCD, and it's going undetected. And so it's getting smushed into your response without any awareness or any intention. The goal is not for you to be this perfect blank slate. When we talk about that in the anchor series, the goal isn't for you to be this perfect anchor or that your lens is going to be so shiny and pristine and clear. You're human. I'm human. It will never be shiny and clear. But can I separate out the lens and see what is my stuff versus what is your stuff? And the first step in doing that is recognizing and identifying these are the smudges on my lens. My bipolar father, right? My emotional neglect, my fear that my kids are going to turn into my dad. These are all things that are happening that are smudges on my lens. What are your lenses? What are the smudges on your lens? It is possible that maybe getting a therapist to work with you on these issues is needed and is helpful. Not for every one of you. I know that a lot of you are burnt out on therapists, whether it's emotionally or financially or both. And you're like, there's no way, Natasha. Some are virtual and it can be really helpful, but you can do this work yourself as well. I don't think that therapy is always the only way to go. I think where there's a will and there's a way and you're willing to explore these things, and we're certainly doing that in the Anchor series, you can learn about yourself in an effective way. But some of you who have had severe trauma or have not unpacked all of this stuff and are feeling triggered or have your own mental health issues, and that's one of the categories that we go into in the Anchor series, it may be very helpful and necessary to get a therapist to walk you through these things. When we get our own help, we are more anchored and we are able to help our kids in a much better way. I would also suggest EMDR for trauma. I feel like EMDR therapy, a very specific approach, I don't recommend it for OCD, but when there's trauma involved in general, in anything, EMDR is really helpful. I did EMDR therapy when my husband suddenly passed away. And ironically, as I was doing EMDR, we were working on, I found him and I tried to resuscitate him. So that trauma was like playing over and over in my head. And so we started working on that. And ironically, within a few sessions, we were going back into my childhood. And the therapist said, yeah, that happens a lot, that there's so much in there. It's like you open up a box and you're like, oh my gosh, this box is so full. We have to empty it all out. And the brain is like, oh, you opened me. Let's get through all of this crap. So that was what happened. It was very helpful. It was very short. I think I only had like 8 sessions, but EMDR'd my way out of that childhood trauma. And I feel better for it. So that might be another option. But for the rest of this episode, I'm going to go through just some basic concrete things that we can do. And this is more in the realm of mindset shifting. So if your parents' approach, whether they were strict or permissive, is impacting you, you want to ask yourself, what do I strive to be? What kind of parent do I want to be? Use your thinking part of your brain, not your reactive emotional part of your brain. And ask yourself, are you overcorrecting or are you mirroring what you experienced? And again, in the Anchor series, we do have worksheets that will go and walk you through this. So you can register at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. Just want to keep mentioning that because it is almost over. And if you are enjoying how we're processing this, I just have more resources for you over there. When I think about how I want to parent, I want to be a parent that validates my kids, but I also want to be an unemotional parent in the sense that I'm not getting hooked into my child's struggles where I'm reactive and dysregulated myself. And so that's my goal. That's the kind of parenting I want to be, where I don't need my child to think I'm their best friend, but long term, they have this memory of a calm, reflective, intentional parent who, no matter what was going on with them, the parent was consistent and stable, because I didn't have that. That's what I strive to be. So what are you striving to be? And what area do you need to work on? Are you overcorrecting? Are you mirroring, which means you're being just like your parent? Or are you trying to control your partner's parenting style because it is triggering you? That's a whole nother thing. Sometimes couples counseling is required when we're dealing with those kind of ghosts in the nursery type of things. All right, the next one, how your parents felt about fears or anxiety or OCD. Whether they normalized it, shamed you, or forced you. How are you different? So if you are encouraging and getting your child to move towards the cliff, not over the cliff, and you're incentivizing them, you're using bravery points. We talk about that in other episodes. You're incentivizing them. You're giving them the skills and the tools, and you're recognizing and reading their cues when it's a bridge too far. How is that different than your parent who forced you, who was cruel and insensitive? They're different. And so processing how they're different is important. And how do you want your kids to be? How do you want that interaction to be? Do you want to be able to validate and normalize their fears or their anxiety or OCD and give them the confidence that they can do it one small step at a time? Okay, the next one, I'm just going through them briefly because we do dive into this in this series, but the mental health issues in your home. Are you seeing your child's future through this lens? Is there a smudge on your lens because you're seeing somebody else other than your child? And then how can you separate them out from your child? For me, when I'm in the moment, and in the Anchor series, I talk about the step of tuning in before tuning out. That's one of the approaches I'm going to teach you. It's a 10-second approach. Like, I'm in the middle of responding to my child's anxiety and OCD. I tune in really quick before I tune out towards them and focus on them. Tune out is probably the wrong word. It sounds like we're tuning out. But go inward and then go outward. I think it's the language I use in my series, which is probably better. It's a 10-second thing. I'm not going to sit there and do a whole therapy session with myself while my child's imploding or exploding, but I'm going to go inward and say, am I responding? Am I feeling overwhelmed because this is reminding me of my dad? Or is my heartbeat racing? And if my heartbeat's racing and I'm feeling really angry right now, something's triggering me. What's triggering me? In the series, we talk about triggers outside of childhood, like just noise triggers me, being late triggers me. If I'm in the middle of doing something, it triggers. Like I've got triggers, you have triggers. So tuning into what all that is, and we're diving into each category in depth, similar to this one in the series. And then do I want to say, okay, he just triggered my suicide fears, and I'm at 60 right now. He doesn't need all 60. He needs probably about 20. So I need to lower the volume. Does that mean I need to walk away for a second? Just go get a drink or go to the bathroom and be right back, right? I don't know if I always have to verbalize, I can't handle this, I have to go. No, I might just be like, I just need to go to the bathroom, I'm going to come right back. But maybe I have to ground myself. But even just the awareness of saying, oop, that really triggered a suicide thought in my head about my dad. That helps me because I realize that I'm seeing the smudge. I'm not looking through it. I actually see it obstructing my view. And that's helpful because then I can focus on the part that's more crystal and recognize, okay, there's a smudge over here, and I'm not focusing on the smudge. I'm focusing on what is and what's in front of me, recognizing there was a smudge on my lens. That is so powerful. It is a daily practice, and we do walk through how do you do this? How do you train your brain? It is possible because I do it all the time. I don't think it's possible to be 100% when I talk about tuning in and then or going inward and then going outward. I don't think any human being can do that 100% of the time. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I cannot. But even if I do it, I would say 60% of the time, I'm parenting with intention, calm, and patience. 60% of the time, that is by far more than most people. Give yourself some grace. It's not going to be perfect. I think that's really important to realize. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the norms of your childhood. And so when we're looking at the things that were great about our childhood and the loss that we're feeling that our kids are not experiencing that, it's important to process that grief. You don't want to live in grief. And I get the difference having lost my husband. There is a difference between processing grief, giving space for grief, but not getting so absorbed with grief that you're not able to ever move on. And so some people never process grief. They never acknowledge grief. Even when losing a partner, I've been in a lot of grief groups and I've seen all flavors of how people process grief. And I've seen some really unhealthy ways and I've seen some healthy ways. And the unhealthy ones are sometimes they're so stuck in their grief and they'll kind of go around and they'll be like, yeah, I've been in this group for 10 years and like they don't feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, it sounded like it just happened yesterday. Like they're still stagnant. No judgment, because I totally get how hard it is, especially when you've lost a partner or a child. But then I've also saw people in these groups where you wouldn't know that they'll be like, oh, I lost my husband last month. And I'm like, what? You're back at work and you look okay. And everyone processes grief differently, but that's not giving space for grief. And the grief of having a child with anxiety and OCD it's just a grief as well. It is a grief of what you want it to be. It's a grief of what is and not what should be in your mind, shoulds, And so give it space. If you haven't grieved, if you've already been grieving, then it's learning to accept, because the next step after grief is acceptance. And then readjusting your expectations and norms to fit where your child is currently at. For me, that is like a daily practice, because we are currently in a place where, we had med changes back in October, which now that's 4 months ago. I had to do my math 4 months ago. And so it feels like forever ago. And we're not able to travel right now. It's taking more of my energy. There's more worries and concerns. And so that energy, there's a grief to that. There's a grief of like, oh my gosh, just this summer we went to Japan and I can't even imagine going, here, like down the road for him to be somewhere for 2 hours. And so there's a grief of what was very recently and what is currently. And then I have to readapt that and say, we are where we are. I'm not helping myself by lamenting on how much I want to travel and how we can't travel and how it's even hard for him to leave the house right now. That's not helping. But I did need to acknowledge and say, yes, that does suck. That is so hard. I'm really sad for me. It's okay to sound selfish in your head. It is sad. And I did have to acknowledge it first and grieve, and then grieve the fear of, oh my gosh, what does this mean for him? And I'm sad for him. And this isn't the life I wanted for him. And I had to get through that grief. And then I had to move into acceptance of, we are where we are. We can handle this. He can handle this. It's not a death sentence. It doesn't mean he's turning into my dad. We are dealing with this right now in this moment. And I know that he has been able to function optimally on the right medication. And so there's hope. And I also know that I've been watching. I have a front row seat to people in the AT parenting community for the 2 decades that I was a child therapist with anxiety and OCD. I have tens of thousands of families in my brain who have had amazing stories, and their kids have been way in the trenches and they're doing phenomenal. And so there's hope. I know there's hope. And that's how I reframe my view of where I'm at right now. That's how I process my grief, move into acceptance, deal with what is and not what I want it to be or what might be. What will might be. Doesn't sound like good English, but you know what I mean. And that's just an example of how we do that. And I need to do that every single day because I wake up, something happens, I get right back in that spiral, and I have to recalibrate, find my balance. How do I recalibrate? How do I look at what smudges I've got on my lens today and then anchor myself? And that's what we're going to be talking about. That's what we are talking about in the Anchor series, how to be an effective anchor for your child with anxiety or OCD, child, teen, or young adult. We're not talking about specific ages. Everyone is welcome. So join us. You can register at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. We're right in the middle of it, so you're not too late. I also do have there's a series website which has all the videos, all the replays, all the bonus live classes, and all the handouts that I've created. And there is also a temporary Facebook group. If you want to connect with other parents, if you want to talk about the series, you do not need to be on Facebook in order to participate in the series. We did notice that there's a lot of people who, more and more people are not wanting to be on Facebook. And so we moved the series, all my series, this one's brand new, so no one's taken it, but we moved them all off of Facebook and they are now on their own series website, which I think is pretty cool. But we kept doing temporary series Facebook groups because there are parents who do love to talk about the series. They love to connect, and it's a way for me to interact with members of the series, the participants of the series, in a more casual way, and we can get to know each other. So join us over at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. If you're enjoying the podcast in general, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave a star where you are consuming your podcast. If you have a few extra minutes, leaving a review greatly helps this podcast, and I will read it next episode to show my gratitude. I do hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.